I bet you've seen one of these products before. These are bioplastics. I've been studying plastics for about 5 years now, and mostly in the last 2 years, I've been looking into their life cycles from cradle to grave and their environmental impacts. Today, there's a real push for bioplastics because we are understanding the effects of the petrol industry and the petrol plastic pollution issue. Bioplastics like PLA are derived from biomass like corn, sugarcane, tapioca, and other forms of cellulose, while other biopolymers like PHA and PHBH come from sugars produced by bacteria. Now, it's claimed that these polymers are more eco-friendly because they're less energy intensive with a smaller carbon footprint and come from renewable resources compared to petrol plastics. But this is only true if they are sourced right and do not increase land use. Some scientists are arguing that if bioplastics are produced from inorganic farming practices, then a PLA fork might have a larger environmental impact than the petrol fork that you used last night when you ordered takeout. When we say environmental impact, it doesn't revolve just around a carbon footprint. Inorganic farms use fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, while consuming more water and energy without properly restoring vital nutrients like nitrogen, carbon, phosphorus, and potassium needed for future harvests. Meaning that environmental impact affects the soil, the surrounding organisms, downstream erosion, and other emerging phenomena. Let's quickly talk about land use. If biopolymer production can be scaled up without adding any footprint to the already established agricultural industry or land use in general, then that's a huge step. This is because agriculture already speaks for 52% of US land, according to the USDA, and 38% of the world's terrestrial surface based on the United Nations 2020 Land Survey. So if we're scaling bioplastics from food waste, compost, bacteria, and other methods with an inconceivably small land footprint, then that's better than adding to the already established issues we have going on today. A study conducted by the University of Pittsburgh compared 7 traditional plastics, 4 bioplastics, and 1 from both fossil fuel and renewable resources. The researchers determined that bioplastics production resulted in greater amounts of pollutants due to the fertilizers and pesticides used in growing the crops and the chemical processing needed to turn organic material into plastic. The bioplastics also contributed to more ozone depletion than the traditional plastics and required extensive land use, and that's based on methane production, and we'll get to that soon. BPET, the hybrid plastic, was found to have the highest potential for toxic effects on ecosystems and expelled the most carcinogens. So BPET scored the worst in the life cycle analysis because it combined the negative impacts of both agriculture and chemical processing. However, bioplastics do produce significantly fewer greenhouse gas emissions than traditional plastics over their lifetime. They establish no net increase in carbon dioxide when they break down because the plants that bioplastics are made from, like corn, absorbed that same amount of carbon dioxide as they grew. A 2017 study determined that switching from the traditional plastic industry to corn-based PLA only would cut US greenhouse gas emissions from plastic by 25%. The study also concluded that if traditional plastics were produced using renewable energy sources, greenhouse gas emissions could reduce by 50 to 75%. So bioplastics that might in the future be produced with renewable energy showed the most promise for substantially reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I honestly think of sourcing bioplastics the same way as sourcing meat. If the meat comes from an organic, regenerative farm, it's more sustainable than other scalable sources as of now. And when I say as of right now, I'm thinking of printed or synthetic meats. Let me know in the comments if you want me to make a video on 3D printed meats. I think they're really fascinating. Earlier, I name dropped that there's claims of bioplastics being eco-friendly. And we've discussed the first portion of the life cycle called the cradle, but now I really want to bypass the transportation, storage, packaging, and use stages and just talk about the grave sequence. So the claim is that bioplastics should be biodegradable because they come from plants or naturally made sugars. However, this is only true if the biopolymers are not blended with any petroplastic to create a product. Take a 100% polylactic acid or PLA product for an example. The starch of corn kernels are composed of long chains of carbon molecules, similar to the carbon chains in plastic from fossil fuels. And the really cool thing is, chemical bonds of these carbon chains from bioplastics can be broken down by microbial life because they're more familiar and accessible to them. So that means that they have built up an understanding to break down these chemical bonds. So this is why bioplastics can degrade and sometimes compost, while petroplastic or blended bio and petroplastic cannot. Now, I've conducted multiple at-home experiments and read many publications by schools like Yale, Columbia, the University of Florida, and my alma mater, as I mentioned previously, the University of Pittsburgh. The experiment is pretty plain and simple. Please only do this if you have virgin plastic because additives to plastic are a whole nother ball game. But what you do is you place the bioplastics like PLA or PHA in compost piles or compost bins with differing temperature and moistures to determine their decomposition rates. So I would set the control as having similar surface area exposure, so having similar pieces of plastic, and microbial activity, so using the same compost bin. And both the publications I've read and my experiments have confirmed that current bioplastics like PHA and PLA only biodegrade under high temperatures and are not easily compostable at home. So biodegradation is dependent on a number of factors, such as microbial activity of the environment, the exposed surface area that I mentioned, moisture, temperature, pH of the soil, and the molecular weight of the plastic, or let's just call this the density of the plastic. And we also have to think about anaerobic versus aerobic decomposition. It has a huge impact as well. Biodegradation in bioplastics under aerobic conditions, which is whenever it has access to water, microbial life, and oxygen, results in carbon dioxide and water. Whereas anaerobic conditions, the degradation products are carbon dioxide and methane, which you and I both know are not good for the environment. Methane is labeled by the EPA as 25 times more potent at trapping heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. Today, bioplastics will either be landfilled because there's no scaled infrastructure to take care of them, or they are recycled by accident where they contaminate petroplastics like polyethylene terephthalate or PET, polypropylene, PP, or polyethylene, PE, and others. And in turn, they just get contaminated and they landfill it all anyways. So likely your bioplastic straw is in a anaerobic landfill, just releasing methane that's 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Woo! What's the answer? Well, honestly, and this is my opinion based on research, we have to step up our end game in the life cycle and figure out a sense of scale, meaning we need to create bioplastics from sustainable and renewable resources that are biodegradable and cheaper. So really, there's no step that takes priority. It kind of has to sequence like this. You figure out scale and infrastructure to handle the cradle to grave sequence, then subsequently the price will drop. And that's really just the learning curve. That's simple economics. It happens all across the board with any product. And possibly with future legislation and pricing, the petrol industry can be snuffed out of competing plastic applications. Now, hold up. I want to just say, quick disclaimer. I am by no means advocating for single-use plastic. Single-use plastic is lazy, scary, and a terror for the ecosystem. I hate it. Everything that I've read, all publications across the board through all sciences, their additives, how they're made, what happens to them. No, I don't condone it. However, I do think bioplastics are a good alternative if it is handled correctly. In my opinion, right now, it's not being handled correctly. We're introducing bioplastics into an already disgusting and saturated issue of disposal of plastics already, contamination and pollution. But My interpretation is, first things first, we need to eliminate unnecessary single-use plastics out of society while changing then what is left from petrol to bio-based products. And we're already starting to see that across the board. Different states are implementing these bans. I've also seen other countries do it. That's awesome. Adjacent to that, widespread infrastructure has to be developed to break down biopolymers, so contamination or pollution doesn't continue to increase. So to lighten the mood, here's some exciting case studies I thought I would quickly share because they're really interesting and they address the scale of the problem. Researchers at Michigan State are working with cyanobacteria to produce sugars through photosynthesis that could be then consumed by plastic-producing bacteria. This seems to be a cheaper and more reusable production approach and could be quite scalable. Now, Columbia University is developing bioplastics from wastewater and solid waste, where they take a two-step bioreactor process. The first one that creates fatty acids from our waste, and then the second one where those fatty acids are then converted and stored as PHA by the bacteria. The bacteria will create PHA from the fatty acids. Really cool. This could also create a scalable market for bioplastics if obviously, if each wastewater plant hopped on board, of course. This would be scalable across a lot of nations, really, across the entire world. And lastly, a company called Full Cycle Bioplastics out in California are working on a food waste PHA plastic that can be compostable and marine degradable. So if it does wind up in the ocean, it can become food for either bacteria and fish rather than obviously a danger. One quick point that I want to make about the last approach is I think that using food waste would be a great means of creating a circular economic approach. Think of it this way. Food is farmed by agriculture, okay? And then the leftover products from the stores, the restaurants, and then also the surplus can be used as bioplastics, which can be then consumed and biodegraded and then put back into the fields and then, of course, be used in agriculture again. And in conclusion to everything that I've said here, I think there is a lot of promise that has to adhere to a shifting idea against single-use plastics with an efficacy of scale production and means of proper biodegradation. So there has to be careful thought put into the process. And throughout my research, it seems that the scientific community is pretty split on this topic. And I can fully understand because I am too. I am very skeptical of bioplastics because of the many implications and factors that go into their production and proper disposal. And heck, we didn't even touch on the production chemicals, the production waste, or plastic additives, just to name drop a few. They're really ravaging the environment right now. Phthalates, PFAs, and of course BPA, and then the different alternatives to BPA that has been okayed by the FDA. I won't get into that. So let me know what your thoughts are about bioplastics in the comments, and I hope that this was really helpful and an introduction to bioplastics. And as always, stay curious, my friend.